You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for the week of July 26th, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where people wear their MAGA hats even in the doctor's office waiting room. And these days, they all look like they want to punch somebody. It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal.
That is true story.
Saw one yesterday. The 45, 47 guy was 812 years old. Looked like he just wanted to punch anybody.
And he had
Very
one of those
angry.
45, 47 hats.
Yeah, pretty mad.
They're very,
Well,
they're very angry. Yes,
And I think he's smart, actually, because if he's going to pick a fight on Medicare in the doctor's waiting room is the perfect place for it, because they just roll him right back, stitch him up, and bring him back out for the next round.
In a building that was built by Obamacare.
Oh yeah, it's kind of perfect.
Yeah. We just want to share something funny with you. One of the things that we're having to hold on to at the New York fucking Times, for better or worse, is my 88-year-old dad doing the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink.
Twice a week with us.
Twice a week, Driftglass joins him on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the answer sheet, and Driftglass and my dad, both men of Chicago, by the way. Indeed. Work out the puzzle. And Thursdays is a tricky one. It always has some sort of stupid trick to it. Sundays is just long. And so Driftglass and my dad, my 88-year-old dad, who's out of the hospital and doing really well with his oxygen therapy and everything. We're so glad. Mm-hmm. Did the puzzle today in 20 minutes. Thursday's puzzle in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And we just had to crack up because there is a Jeb Bush clue. That's all I'm going to say. There's a Jeb Bush clue in the puzzle today.
Yeah.
And it made us laugh and laugh.
You know, he's been forgotten by all but the New York Times crossword puzzle. So,
Exactly.
Well, and Tim Miller. More about that later. But
more about that later. My gosh. Yet another reason why we're done with cable TV news for the immediate future. Morning Joe assembled a panel of hardcore Trump-supporting women who one commenter noted had peaked in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But Morning Joe wanted them to give their hot takes on what having Kamala Harris means to them when she's at the top of the Democratic ticket.
Right. And they enlisted Elise Jordan, former Republican stooge for the worst people in the world, to facilitate the group or stick a microphone in front of them or whatever. Anyway.
Yeah. These, and they're Midwestern white ladies, Republicans.
They're very afraid. They're so afraid.
And you can predict exactly how it went.
Yeah.
Slack-jawed ignorance, terror at the border. It's all about the border.
Mm-hmm.
And crime in the cities and more MAGA talking points. One woman said, "I'm worried about it." And another said, "Well, I think she's going to go for the minority and female and younger voters." Mm-hmm. Everybody is excited about her. And that scares me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right where I want them to. Scared. Holy crap. On some level.
I'm so scared that they turn out.
Oh no!
I'm telling you, they're going to find out what their party really is, and they're not going to like it, and they're going to have to lie to themselves again. About what they're voting for.
They're used to it by now.
Yeah,
these people didn't get where they are today in the year of our Lord 2024 without lying to themselves all the time.
This leads us to the subject of stories, Driftglass.
Exactly.
And you and I have gotten very good at predicting what the media is going to do and how they're going to react. Predicting what Republican base voters and Fox News zombies are going to do is pretty easy.
Right.
It's not always easy to predict the media, and what by that I mean the New York fucking Times and CNN and even MSNBC. But there are some core storytelling tropes that they are going to use, and that they're going to some comfort zones that they continually fall back on. And we think that based on our years of experience with that, we can predict how the next few months are going to go leading up to November 5th.
Yes, we can't predict the outcomes, but
No.
we can tell you based on our lives as writers. We're both professional writers, and we have facilitated story workshops. We've taught story workshops.
Yeah.
And so we want to bring your attention to something wonderful on the internet, and that is a Kurt Vonnegut. The late great Kurt Vonnegut had this terrific lecture series on the shape of stories, because he was an engineer by trade, and he always joked about the University of Chicago. He wasn't going to let them live it down that they have him on as an English professor, and he never ever got a degree in English. He's an engineer by profession. And so he has this lecture on the shape of stories that he performed for various audiences over like 20 years. And it's available on YouTube, and it's well worth your time. And over the years, you can tell if you see the older ones and the newer ones that he tweaked it just a little bit, and he changed his timing as he got older and got more, Mark Twainish. He would wait for the audience to react and let the silence be filled with laughter and so forth. And he said you could plot the shape of any story on a graph simple enough to be understood by a computer. And that appealed to his engineering brain. And it appeals to us as people who like structure and plot and understanding how stories work. The vertical axis, the up and down axis, is the GI axis. And that means good fortune at the top and ill fortune at the bottom. Robust good health, and you're dying of something at the bottom. The horizontal axis, which is the timeline, is the BE axis, which is beginning to entropy. And that's when you pause for laughter, because
it's not beginning to end, it's beginning to entropy.
We're all college graduates here. We know what that means, and we all know why it's funny. Ha 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 ha. Anyway.
Now then, I'll give you a marketing tip. To the people who can afford educations and buying books and magazines and all that, who can read, don't like to read about people who are poor or sick. So start your story up here. Now, the simplest story, and if you stay home and watch this on television, it'll be told again and again and again. Nobody ever gets tired of this story. I call it Man in a Hole, but it needn't be about a man in a hole. Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. Now, the far end is a little higher than where we began, because, the reader thinks, well, by God, I'm a human being too. I must have that much in reserve if I get into trouble or whatever. Now, another story that's very popular, and none of these are copyrighted, is I call it Boy Meets Girl, but it needn't be about a boy or a girl. It's somebody on a day like any other day comes across something perfectly wonderful. Oh boy, this is my lucky day. Shit. And gets it back again.
So visualizing this kind of simple graph is very helpful when understanding the shape of the story the political media is telling us over and over again. And if you want to be like us, and why wouldn't you, successfully predicting how the media mob will react to almost any situation.
Right. Now, remember this. The elite media really, truly does consider itself separate and apart from American democracy. Of course, they're not at all. On the one hand, without our democracy and the constitutional protections it affords, there wouldn't be a free press. Journalists would either be state propagandists or political prisoners. But
I know which ones we would be, honey.
The First Amendment guarantees them the right to free speech. On the other hand, the failures and obsessions of the media have had immediate and disastrous consequences for our democracy, which the media always just shrugs off.
Yeah.
I will remind you that Peter Baker of the New York fucking Times is not registered to vote, does not vote in elections because he considers himself above the democratic process.
Yeah. And the disasters they create are always somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
They're just there to tell the story.
But that's not the story they tell themselves, Driftglass.
No,
this is the story they tell themselves.
As for me, these are my stories. I observe all that transpires here, but I do not, cannot, will not interfere, for I am the Watcher.
But what the corporate media, the elite media, absolutely refuses to admit about its pretenses, about being above it all, is the very thing, and this is thanks to you good people out there repeating it over and over and over again for, 14 years now. A whole bunch of very credible people outside the corporate media looking in can clearly see now. This has become a thing that people other than crazy liberal bloggers can recognize. This is, in fact, from Professor Timothy Snyder's Substack on July 21st of this very year. Professor Snyder is the Levine Professor of History at Yale, author of On Freedom, On Tyranny, Our Malady, Road to Unfreedom, Black Earth, and Bloodlands. And the reason I know about this is because it was immediately picked up and promoted on social media by David K. Johnson, who you probably know from The TV Machine. He is a professor of law and journalism. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He's written 4 bestsellers, and he's been doing investigative reporting for 58 years, which is a damn long time. Now, see if this from Professor Snyder sounds at all familiar to any of you out there. I will try to read it in a proper Yale professorial tone. I don't have a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows. I don't smoke a pipe.
No, but you've got pipes. Driftglass, you've got pipes. If you just read it in the Driftglass tone, you'll be fine.
Well, thank you. Thank you, darling. I appreciate that. Anyway, quote, why does American television and press, both sides, are politics? Why are such different presidential candidates presented as equally flawed? Why do the outrages of Trump, for example, at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, lead to the humiliation of Biden? Both sidesism, and Professor Snyder, just correcting you here because we got there first, please use both siderism from now on because that's the appropriate Driftglass approved phrase. Anyway, both sidesism is the habit of reducing the world into 2 perspectives, treating the 2 as fundamentally alike, and then ignoring or adjusting the data. One cause of this odd behavior is the ownership of media companies. Another is fear. Yeah, so far so good, right?
Right.
But both sidesism is not just a practice. It passes in the United States for a principle of journalism. Indeed, the dualism is almost unquestionable. Americans tend to take it for granted, but it makes no sense. No data from the world around us indicates that 2 is the correct number of perspectives, nor that any 2 perspectives once chosen would be equal. These are, rather, articles of faith. Once accepted, they enable the public performance we wrongly called media. Both sidesism does not mediate, but mystify. Its practitioners, called anchors or publishers, are shamans or priests, mystifiers. To be sure, media people do not think they're mystifying, nor are we in the habit of seeing them as practicing a religion. But let us take a step back. Let us consider, for the sake of argument, that both sidesism might be a dualist cult. Let us place its beliefs and practices in the context of the history of religion and see what happens. Unquote. Some of us were calling David Brooks the Pope of Both Sides Do It, of the High and Holy Church of Both Sides Do It.
Like maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Decades ago. Yeah, and so this is no big news to us. But yay that a Yale professor is saying this in July of 2024, and 3 cheers for David K. Johnson for spreading the word. That's all good. No complaints here. However, we, Blue Gal, you and I, don't need to place the media's beliefs and practices in the context of the history of religion to see what happens. And why is that, Blue Gal?
Well, we don't need to do that because we've been doing this for 14 years.
Right. Yes, you are correct.
And on our blogs for 20 years. So, you know, my blogiversary is 20 years this September. We know all about this huge corporate media beast, which tells itself and the rest of the world every day that it is institutionally fair and impartial, Driftglass.
Yes, it does.
that it believes fairness and impartiality demand that it treat both candidates the same.
Yeah.
But for them, the definition of the word same has been warped beyond repair.
Mm-hmm.
There's a phrase you probably heard in different contexts, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. And righties always use this to smack down affirmative action, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's been especially popular among libertarians, Republicans who have this bone deep belief that all this equality stuff has gone way too far, and that anyone who isn't one of them but manages to whip their ass at academics or business or politics must be cheating.
Got to be.
Yeah. And DEI,
right.
That's the only reason Kamala Harris got where she's got is, and, we know what DEI stands for in their brains.
Yes, we do.
When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. What are you taking away from me?
Right.
By being equal.
Yeah. We're the master race.
Right.
What are you doing sneaking up on us like that?
As long as gay people marry someone of the opposite sex, they're totally equal to us.
Sure. Absolutely.
But when it comes to the aloof, impartial political media, they have no interest in equality of opportunity in their reporting, only equality of outcome. Because Donald Trump had every opportunity. Here's the deal. He had every opportunity not to be a tax cheat, folks. He had every opportunity to not be a business fraud, a sexual predator, a multiply convicted felon, a coup plotter, and a traitor. But he chose otherwise.
He chose the life he lives now.
Yeah.
He took all of his opportunities and pissed them away to become the monster he is today. On the other hand, both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden chose lives of public service, often quite exemplary public service. They have all the usual flaws. We're not going to lie about that, and compromises that a life in politics leads to, and you are free to dislike them for your own reasons. But they were and are deeply normal politicians, and Donald Trump is deeply abnormal. Not just that, he's dangerously abnormal. He leads a cult, not a political party, and his cult is dedicated to ending American democracy and replacing it with a totalitarian state where the whims of the dear leader are enforced by violence. But this is not the story the political media is capable of telling, because they are institutionally committed to equality of outcomes, not opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What candidates believe or don't believe, what policies they believe today or flip-flop tomorrow, like Trump does all the time, whether they lie continuously or not, whether they're demonstrably insane or not, all of that is irrelevant to the media. Doesn't matter in the least. The shape of the story the media is damn well going to tell, regardless of the facts, is of two candidates who are more or less equal, from two political parties which are more or less equal, both vying for political office in a country that is more or less equally divided between two more or less equally extreme camps that both alienate the noble center, who are really the beating heart of America, this great big center-right country we live in. How many times have you heard the media insist that this is a center-right country over the last 20, 30 years?
Mm-hmm.
A billion? In a race that will always be a nail-biter and ratings gold, that will always have a Sacco, edge of your seat, winner by a nose ending, that's also ratings gold.
Thank you, Electoral College, where land votes.
Yeah, but that's ratings. The race has to be a nail-biter. It has to be edge of your seat, or else who's going to pay attention? Who's going to buy the newspaper? Who's going to watch television? It's
a 50-50 country, Duff Glass, and centrism is the way forward.
Yeah. I missed that boat.
The very idea of saying not just once, but over and over again, using all the media firepower they gave to butt her emails and Biden is old, that Trump is insane and manifestly unfit to hold any office, or that the Republican Party is a cult, or that the average Republican voter is a bigot and an imbecile, or is all of that. It's abhorrent to the political media on almost a cellular level. And I want to interject here and say, we've heard from a couple of listeners who are either mad at us or don't want us to be mad at them.
Right.
About how they felt about Biden dropping out before he did.
It's all valid.
We have no arguments with fellow voters who get up and go to work every day or are retired or whatever. They're just average voters like yourself, having an opinion about whether Joe Biden should drop out or not.
At all. Not at all.
Not. We have a big problem with the New York fucking Times hammering one side of the story to make Joe Biden being old equal to Donald Trump being a criminal.
Right.
That's it.
And
using their tremendous position to hammer that into the heads of people who rely on them as a constitutionally protected voice to give accurate information to them. And they form and lean their identities. My dad does this, leans his identity as a well-informed person on the New York Times, and has been betrayed by that institution.
And once the New York Times starts on one of these jihads, the butthurt email is jihad. Not reporting the story, but deciding we're going to just kick the crap out of this person just because we can, because we're the New York fucking Times. Once they start doing that with that giant megaphone they have, they give permission and direction and a template for all the imitators out there to follow suit. Oh, it's safe to do that now? And everybody piles on. New York Times starts the ball rolling down the hill and then steps back and says, avalanche? Why, I have no idea how this started.
No, I'm just reporting what the New York Times said.
Right.
That was Dick Cheney.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to give credit to the New York Times for their reporting on this.
Right.
And all of a sudden everyone has to just sit down and shut up because the authority of the New York Times has spoken.
Right. Has reported a story that Dick Cheney leaked to the New York Times.
Leaked to the New York Times.
And then quoted himself anonymously.
Yes,
anonymous sources saying, well, the New York Times, it's the New York Times, it must be credible.
Right.
Right.
And they have hoard out their credibility to both siderism and in some cases to, bad actors in the Republican Party.
Oh, and just for the record, the place where Dick Cheney pulled this shenanigan was the most trusted news program on Sunday mornings.
Yes.
Meet the Press.
Yeah.
So please, it's a fucking puppet show. And the people who are running the puppet show have this one story they're goddamn well going to tell. And that's the subject of our podcast today. So sorry for interrupting. Please carry on, baby.
This is the point. No one is blaming anyone who's listening to this podcast unless you are a columnist for the New York fucking Times. Then it's all your fault. Okay. Or a Schultzberger. Yes. So the shape of the story they're going to tell is two parallel lines inching dead center down the beginning-ending axis, beginning to end, barely separated by a handful of undecided voters in swing states who flop this way or that, depending on the day of the week and what's on TV. And above it all, enforcing conformity to this story is the corporate media acting in the capacity of the handicapper general in Kurt Vonnegut's short story, Harrison Bergeron. And here's a clip from that story.
The year was 2081, and everyone was finally equal. They weren't only equal before God and the law, you see. They were equal every which way. Nobody was smarter than anybody else. Nobody was better looking than anybody else. Nobody was stronger or quicker than anybody else. And all this equality was due to the 211th, 212th, and 213th Amendments to the Constitution, and to the unceasing vigilance of the United States Handicapper General. The strong wore weights to make them weaker. The intelligent wore earpieces that kept them from taking unfair advantage of their brains. Even the beautiful sometimes wore masks in situations where their beauty might simply be too distracting. It was the golden age of equality. Some things about living still weren't quite right, though. April, for instance, continued to drive people crazy by not quite being springtime. And it was in that clammy month that the HG men came to take George and Hazel Bergeron's son, Harrison, away.
And it's a terrific story. You should read the whole thing. It's got a tragic ending, but it's well worth the 10 minutes it would take you to read it. So go do that.
But it's the fetishization of equality and making sure everybody is both sides the same.
And the outcome of equality, the outcome that both candidates have to be nearly identical photo image opposites of each other, or else
it has to be
we don't know what to
48
do.
in the polls all the time. Yeah. Now, consider this. One newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, which, yes, okay, it's owned by Rupert Murdoch and News Corp, already has many strikes against it in terms of being team evil.
Yeah, but as an example.
This is an example of what's going on. The Wall Street Journal published 2 opinion pieces in the same month, July 9th and July 23rd. These op-eds, Driftglass, were written by the same person, Jason L. Riley. The same person wrote them in the same newspaper in the same month. The July 9th op-ed is entitled, Kamala Harris Would Be the Best Democratic Choice. Less than 2 weeks later, the same person at the same newspaper, wrote on July 23rd, Kamala Harris isn't the change Democrats need.
Yeah.
Did anybody notice? Yes, we noticed.
Yeah.
So, dear listeners, after the shit show that was the Republican convention that proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that Donald Trump is crazy and that his followers are a cult, the media printed the stories they had already written about an imaginary convention that never happened. They were literally reprinting Republican press releases about how calm and serene and decent and a changed man Donald Trump was. How all that hate speech had just evaporated. It was gone.
It was a new day. A morning in America.
From the tomb with a white robe. And the crowds, they're just wowed by Trump's new decency. All his indecency had been absorbed by the mini pad on his ear.
Right. Amazing.
And if you listened to Donald Trump's speech accepting the nomination, you knew it was a lie.
All of it. All of it was a lie.
But all of which was inevitable to give the shape of the story they were determined to tell.
Right. Exactly. And this is also why Joe Biden leaving the race and endorsing his vice president momentarily screwed up their narrative completely. Because the media, led by the New York fucking Times, had devoted a staggering amount of time and energy obsessively focused on Joe Biden's age and entertaining every bit of anonymous gossip about his state of mind, while aggressively underreporting the fact that Trump was melting down in public almost every day. And to their minds, this was fair, completely fair, utterly fair. These are treating both candidates the same because everybody already knew about Trump. So why dwell on it? Why report on it? Why talk about it at all? Everybody knows that stuff. So to be fair, they concentrated on stomping the crap out of Joe Biden to equalize him with Donald Trump.
It is exactly the Kurt Vonnegut story.
It is.
We're going to put weights around Joe Biden's neck to make his strength the same as Donald Trump's.
Yep. And then suddenly, Joe Biden stepped aside.
Uh-oh.
Suddenly, the dog has caught the car.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it. You know, I just do things.
So now what? So now what do we do? Well, you know what's next. You are all smart people and well-informed. You know exactly what's next. Now, according to the doctrine of the cult of both sides do it, the media must strap Kamala Harris into their Procrustean bed and try to crush her, to butt her emails her until she is roughly equally fit or unfit for the White House as Donald Trump.
So today I want to tell you about the idea of Procrustes, okay? The concept of conformity versus understanding and appreciating uniqueness. There was a man named Procrustes, and he lived on a mountain near Athens. And he would lure people in to stay at his inn. And he had there a bed. And he would say to them, "Come, stay on my bed. It's lovely. It's so delightful and comfortable." And then he would trick them, and he'd kind of lock them in, strap them down, and he had to make them conform to the exact specs of the bed. If the person was too short, he would stretch the person out so that it was entirely perfectly from top to bottom fitting the bed. If the person was too long, he would chop them off. It wasn't very nice. And so Procrustes became the villain who was fitting people to a bed. And today we use the term a Procrustean bed to refer to the idea of an arbitrary standard against which we measure someone.
Because that is the shape of the story that their story demands. And this is where we come in.
Because it's going to be up to all of us to push back hard against both the hurricane of conservative media lies that are headed our way and the racism and the sexism and the nonsense that's headed our way from the conservative media.
Oh, and don't bother trying to rebut the lies conservative media is telling, because it doesn't matter. The conservative base is locked in. They're just locked in completely. But the mainstream media is a different story.
Yeah. And when you hear, right-wing media like Seb Gorka use the word colored, you have to call it out. You have to amplify the racism there because the mainstream media doesn't want to be painted with that.
Right. Well, and the point being, when Seb Gorka says stuff like that, you don't say, oh my God, Seb Gorka, stop doing that. No. You say, oh my God, New York Times, why aren't you reporting on Seb Gorka doing that?
Being
That's
a racist.
The point.
Yes. Yeah. Why aren't you reporting on the argument that congressional leadership is trying to suppress from their members? And we'll get to that in a minute. So here is a primo example of what we're talking about from Laura Bazelin on Twitter. Quote, in 2019, I wrote a New York Times op-ed critical of Kamala Harris on criminal justice issues. This is before the 2020 election. In the last week, meaning now, every media outlet you can think of has asked me to, quote unquote, comment on her candidacy. Well, here you go. Dems, all of us, need to make sure that Kamala Harris wins the presidency, unquote. Oh, no, Driftglass. She was supposed to be critical of Kamala Harris.
Could you tell us something you don't like about her? Even off the record. That'd be fine.
We'll quote you anonymously about how much you don't like her. And so my TV husband, Elie Mystal, replied, this is great from Laura Bazelin, but please note also what she's trying to tell you. The media is desperate to get liberals to dunk on Harris. Literally anybody willing to call themselves a Democrat will and be negative about Kamala will be platformed in the coming weeks. Read critically, please, unquote.
Yeah.
There's another story that's not being covered and won't be covered and will continually not be covered until after Election Day. And that is the money.
Yep.
I've mentioned this on other podcasts. Donald Trump is bankrupting the Republican Party. In plain sight, as we speak. After the shooting, the Secret Service has asked Donald Trump to please, please, please only have indoor rallies. He can't afford to have indoor rallies. He can't afford, and everybody wants cash up front now because they know he doesn't pay his bills.
Right. That's right.
He can't afford, or he won't afford, to pay for a venue. And so the cheapest or the free or whatever is what he's going to take, even at the risk of his own life. And he's broke. He is spending it all. And he's having his fundraisers at Mar-a-Lago and his New Jersey Golf Club because that puts more money in his pocket. It is always self-dealing. And no one at the New York Times is talking about that. It is exactly like Sarah Palin in Africa.
Right.
The day after the election, we found out, she called Africa a country.
Right. Right.
Now, everybody knew that. That was a Steve Schmidt leak after they lost.
Right.
To Fox News.
It wasn't me. It
No,
was her.
She was an idiot.
We couldn't do anything with it.
But you found out about how stupid she was after the election. It would have been really helpful to know how stupid she was before the election. Yeah. How her own people thought she was stupid.
I can only imagine how Junior Dude lost his mind when he heard that.
Oh,
because he's Mr. Geography. Even when he was a little one, he was Mr. Geography.
Mr. Geography.
What? What do you say? That woman is an idiot. That's how he...
That was his bonding with Keith Olbermann when Keith Olbermann was on television. He was 11. And Keith Olbermann was talking about Sarah Palin.
Mm-hmm.
And Junior Dude walked into the bedroom where the TV was, and he looked at me, and he looked at the TV, and he said, "That's Sarah Palin." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Dad thinks she's an idiot." And at that moment, Keith Olbermann from the TV said, "That woman is an idiot." And I mean, Junior Dude fell to his knees. Like his worlds, it was the coincidence of that and worlds colliding. And he was just bonded to Keith Olbermann from then on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, because Keith Olbermann was the kinder, gentler TV dad.
Well, and we're breaking our own rule a little bit here because this is not our No Fair Remembering Stuff show.
Yeah.
So we are remembering things from the before time, which we're going to do more of as the months and years go on. We have some things planned. I'm not going to say what. I'm just going to say that 50 years ago was a pretty big year, and we're going to talk a little bit about that.
And Rachel Maddow, eat your heart out. We're going to do some real historical
stuff
without an intern to manage clips for us. We're going to be doing some history.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, but I just want to say that after the election, you're going to find out where'd the money go.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that we're not still talking about how WinRed stole from Republican donors.
Because we're not.
Because we're
not
not.
The story.
It's not the story. It's not the shape of the story.
Right. Unless Joe Biden / Kamala Harris had plundered the DNC and had taken out pallets of millions of dollars to spend on hookers and blow and a private plane or whatever, then it's a story. But only if Democrats can be credibly accused or even anonymously accused of something remotely similar does Republican perfidy become a story. And that's just how they're going to be for forever. So it really does fall to us, and I mean us in the largest possible sense, once again, to swing in and save the day. Now, broken...
Can I say one more thing? And while we're riffing,
of course,
about a guy who has a YouTube channel. He is a plus-sized guy with a plus-sized wife, and he does a regular YouTube channel podcast about cruising and being on cruises as a plus-sized person, and also about gambling on cruise ships. He likes to go to the casino.
I want to make sure we understand. This is not cruising bars for.
No, this is going on cruises
on a boat.
And comparing Carnival to Royal Caribbean or whatever, and comparing the casinos and comparing this and that. He did a short video today that I caught, and it is about politics. And one of his regular viewers got very upset with him because a Kamala Harris ad appeared before one of his videos on YouTube, over which he has no control.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris has bought out YouTube. You cannot click on a YouTube these days without a Kamala Harris ad going up.
Scaring those Ohio women to death.
I think those were Wisconsin women.
Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Ohio. Don't know which. They're all the same.
White Trump women, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this host of this, it's called La Vida Loca channel. You can go look it up. He goes off on them, on this viewer who's mad at him. He said, "I do a podcast on YouTube about going on cruises and gambling on cruises and eating on cruises. Mm-hmm. I do not talk about politics on my channel. And I have no control over what YouTube does. And here is somebody threatening him, getting mad at him, telling him they're going to unsubscribe. They're all mad. And he just goes off and he says, you have freedom of speech. You do not have freedom of audience. And my audience is not your audience. You do not get to take my audience and tell them what you think about politics.
Fair.
Get your own channel.
Yeah, there's whole channels for political podcasts.
Right-wing bullshit on, and we'll see how much ad time Kamala Harris has bought on Rumble.
Yeah.
I think it'd be hilarious if she did. If she had so much money, she just decided, oh yeah, we'll buy some ads on Rumble too. But yeah, like, go ahead, Jeff Glass.
Well, I'm just going to say, speaking of political podcasts and the before time,
mm-hmm.
I broke one of my most recent rules, which is I'm not listening to the bulwark, even though my job is to do advanced listening of what our Never Trump allies are up to. And I listened to Mr. Tim Miller's show today, only
you
because
did for a reason, right? This is important. Yeah.
Only because Mr. Rick Perlstein, friend of the pod, one of the earliest people who said, you guys should have a show.
He knew us before we were married. Yeah.
Yeah. We used to hang out at the Heartland restaurant in Rogers Park. And we ran into Rick and we were friends of his. We went to his shows, not his shows. We saw him at Laughing Liberally.
Yep.
A couple of times. So
I think you and I had we're keeping our relationship or our friendship at that point. Yeah. I think it was friendship.
A little bit on the DL.
We were personally involved with each other, and we're not letting anybody know that, as we were kind of dating.
Tax purposes. Just for tax purposes.
Yeah. And then we podcasted together and it got serious, and that was different. But
Tim Miller had Rick Perlstein on, which is a good thing. That's great. I like to hear Rick getting promoted everywhere because he is a really good historian and a really good writer. Mm-hmm. And he is, pretty far to the left and makes no bones about that. That's where he comes from. And that's why he's a very interesting guest. I think
on some things he's to the left of us by quite a bit.
Oh, I think
I don't have a problem with that.
No. And that, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
But Rick Perlstein has his historical hat on and talked about the ever rightward ratcheting of the conservative movement. The subject was, what the hell happened to conservatism? And Rick, after properly spanking Democrats or saying Democrats are inadequate or they do too much triangulation, got down to the meat of the matter, and said, "Do you really want to talk about this? Okay, it didn't start in 2016, Tim." And he goes, he was clearly aware of the host's sensitivity of the subject, but he did say, I wrote a lot about the lies that Mitt Romney told during the 2012 election. And that you could clearly hear Tim Miller tighten up because that was his boy. He worked for him. And Rick reminded people that I think the first time the New York Times used the word lie was describing a Mitt Romney thing that he had lied about, very clearly lied about. Mm-hmm. And boy, howdy did Mr. Miller get all pissy when Rick started talking about the trajectory of the Republican Party starting before 2016. He did not want to hear about that. He wanted to, and suddenly he turns into David Brooks. He turns into Mr. Both Sides. Well, liberals lie too. The Democratic Party makes mistakes too. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, the wiring is still in their head. It's still there, and it can be activated by pushing the wrong button. And the wrong button with almost every Never Trumper is to say, this shit was going down and it was bad before Trump showed up.
Right.
And the lies that George W. Bush told, and the lies that Nixon told, and the lies and the bullshit Goldwater was up to and his followers were up to, all led to this moment. And that is not a subject at all that Mr. Miller was comfortable talking about in that level of granularity. I appreciate him bringing him on. I appreciate him pulling a chair out and letting an actual liberal talk. But it was very clear the subject was very sore, and he didn't want him poking at it too much.
Yeah.
So just saying, it's endemic on that side. They cannot.
I'm going to go full Meet the Press here, Drift Class.
Yes, Blue Gal. Which Meet the Press?
Meet the Press with David Brooks on you and say, Drift Class, you wrote a post today about Bret Stephens.
I did write a post.
And in that post, you referred to Bret Stephens and vampires. Would you tell me what you thought about that?
I would be happy to, Blue Gal. If you would like to read the post aloud, it's very, very long.
I'm not going to read the post aloud. Okay. I know that David Gregory would do that for David Brooks and put a clip on the screen so people could read along.
Right.
We don't have a screen to do that. So you're just going to have to tell us about your post in your own words, please.
Or in the absence of David Brooks, just read a David Brooks column and ask other people what they thought about it, because that was the deal they had. That was the handshake deal they had on Meet the Press. As you know, as some of you know, as many of you know, because I say it a lot, I wrote a post, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the Never Trumpers started, coming on strong, that a lot of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but an awful lot of them behave like deposed Russian aristocracy after the revolution. They are, they were used to being the royalty in their own country, in their own party. They were used to ordering people around and snapping their fingers and having people do what they want them to do. They're used to having big platforms of their own, which they could say whatever the fuck they wanted. They were used to slagging liberals every time they drew a breath, and they thought this would go on forever. Mm-hmm. And then the peasants, the serfs, rose up and drove them out because the serfs wanted Donald Trump. They didn't want the aristocrats. And so they drove them out, and they landed on our shores, over on the liberal side. And the minute they hit the deck over here, they started ordering us around. They started treating us like servants. They started demanding that we accommodate them. Hey, fuckers, you fucked up and burned your party down. Please don't tell us how to run our party. We're doing fine. We make the mistakes that every other political party makes, but you screwed up your party, and you should be grateful that we even let you in the fucking door. But that's not how it worked. They came over and were just like, you got to Reagan this place up a little bit, you know, to make us...
And colonized MSNBC. Yeah.
You did. And you have to make your party more accommodating, more Reagan-light for us to feel comfortable here. Or else we're going to just sit on our hands and watch the country burn. And that was the extent of my analysis. And I backed it up with a ton of quotes and tweets and so on from a bunch of conservatives. But it occurred to me that's just sort of an aspect of their personality. And they're a lot more similar to vampires than to, because, and
you mean Bram Stoker's vampires. That's what you mean,
Bram
right?
Stoker. I mean specifically Count Dracula.
Yeah.
And the Count Dracula story has been told a million times, but basically Dracula had to get the hell out of his own country. Had to go to England. Now, it's unclear as to what really happened, how that really happened, but it appears that the peasants caught on to him and were used to defending themselves against vampires. And so Dracula had to make the crossing over to England, where the teeming millions were waiting for him, fresh feeding ground. And that's exactly what happened. So Bret Stephens, vampire, gets driven out of his own party. What does he do? He goes across the sea. He takes with him his conservative coffin with the Reagan dirt inside of it that he reposes in every night to keep himself alive. And what are the characteristics of a vampire? Well, they only have power over you and can use you as vampire food if you invite them into your home. Well, thanks, MSNBC, and thanks, New York Times. That's exactly what you did. You invited them in unconditionally and gave them the run of the place. And the second thing is, they can't see their reflection.
Yeah.
They cast no reflection in the mirror. And the common characteristic, even from Tim Miller, all the way down to the bottom of the barrel, is that these people do not want to see themselves in a mirror. They want other people to see themselves in a mirror. They want to look over there and cast your attention over there, but they do not want to see themselves in a mirror. And that's why I wrote a long post about Bret Stephens and posited that maybe he's a vampire.
Thank you, Drift Class. I'm sure everyone will go to the New York Times to read that column later on today.
God, I hope not. If
that's what I did. Blogspot.com.
Yeah, you sent them to the New York Times, honey, and I hope if that's the result, I apologize. Please don't go to the New York Times and read Bret Stephens' column.
No, you're gonna go to the Drift Glass blog and read your column.
Thank you. Let's go to the news, shall we?
Yeah, news roundup. The Bidening continues. Kamala Harris, go Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
As you all know by now, for the sake of his party and his country, Joe Biden has stepped aside as the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee and thrown his support behind his vice president, Kamala Harris, and so have we. He made a speech to the nation on Wednesday, explaining his reasons, touting his administration's truly amazing record, and making clear that what his priorities would be during the last months of his administration. His speech was short, heartfelt, dignified, and in every way admirable. And afterwards, the right lost their goddamn minds. I want to just say, we can't wait for the Biden convention speech.
Oh, no, it's going to be awesome.
He's going to have to genuflect just a few times, He's just going to have to, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph,
I have to ask forgiveness from you and the Lord, because I'm going to use some language that we used to use in Scranton when we were fighting off corn pop. And, I want old Joe. I want Grandpa Joe up there telling stories and talking shit about the Republican Party.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what I want.
Yep.
And
Donald Trump specifically.
And that's what we're going to get. I hope that's what we're going to get.
Yep.
Democrats adopted rules to accomplish this, which is their right to do because they're a political party and they have rules and they meet to vote on those rules like every other political party does. And they change the rules to choose their presidential nominee via a virtual roll call vote, voting to officially nominate Kamala Harris, who, let us remind ourselves, has already amassed enough pledged support from the delegates to win, and that virtual vote will begin online on August 1st. At least 3,180 of the nearly 4,000 Democratic delegates have already endorsed Kamala Harris. The party wants to officially nominate its presidential and vice presidential candidates by August 7th to avoid the possibility of Republican bad faith litigation and fuckery over the ballot access in Ohio.
Right.
Wise
and
move.
Anyone who tries to tell me, look, the Republicans already changed the rules in Ohio and we don't have to do this.
Yes.
I do not trust Republicans.
No. See also Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not trust Republicans.
At all.
And we will do whatever it takes to maintain ballot access in Ohio. And these delegates are already Harris delegates.
Right.
They were prepared to vote for Kamala Harris for vice president. So this should come as a surprise to no one that they are endorsing Kamala Harris for president. They are already Harris delegates. Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson and other top Republicans are begging, please, begging their racist members to keep their racism under wraps. At least for now. Stop making overtly racist and sexist attacks against Harris. But they can't.
They can't. That dog won't hunt. That dog really wants to say the N-word is what that dog wants. And ain't nothing Mike Johnson going to stop him from doing that. Yeah. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign filed a complaint with the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, arguing that the Harris campaign can't take over the Biden campaign's $91.5 million. This is the broke-ass man who has plundered his own party to the point of bankruptcy.
Right.
Even though the funds raised were authorized for both Biden and Harris and share the same entity as their joint campaign depository under federal election law. It's all legal. It's all legit. And, of course, it's a nuisance lawsuit by the king of nuisance lawsuits.
Nuisance lawsuits. Also, as Lawrence pointed out several times, Harris is the only Democrat who can take that money.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Meanwhile, almost 40,000 people registered to vote in the 48 hours after Biden announced he was suspending his re-election campaign and endorsing Harris. Vote.org said 38,500 new voters registered, the largest number of registrations in a 48-hour period this election cycle, and an almost 700% daily increase in new registrations. Of the new voter registrations, 83% were from people aged 18 to 34. And that's before the Swifties come in.
Oh, yeah. No, this campaign is just getting started.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to sit back and do whatever I can, as we all are.
I've got my stack of postcards right here. Yep. I'm getting another stack in the mail that I ordered some more to send out to increase voter turnout. Mm-hmm. And that's among our registered voters, Democratic registered voters. Absolutely.
Meanwhile, over at the Washington Post, here's a headline for you. Quote, J.D. Vance adds veteran appeal to Trump's populist campaign, unquote. And that story is by Mr. Hugh Hewitt. So,
wow, he really polished that turd, didn't he?
He did. Well, he's good at that. He's the cyborg sent from the future to polish turds and destroy America.
Mm-hmm. The Nation was deeply saddened to hear that Senator Joe Manchin has told CBS News that he will not challenge Vice President Harris for the Democratic nomination, especially since he's a registered independent now.
Uh-huh.
And by the Nation, we mean the ghost of Joe Lieberman and the mortal remains of Ron Fournier.
Yeah. And whatever's left of no labels. You know, again, speaking of grifting right-wing assholes. Mm-hmm. Some exciting news about Mark Robinson. He's the Republican candidate for North Carolina governor who made a name for himself recently by declaring that, quote, some people just need killing, unquote. I will just leave that there for you to meditate on for a moment. This is from the blog Notes from the Chalkboard. Quote, in a 2023 interview with the Carolina Journal, North Carolina's infamous gubernatorial hopeful Mark Robinson was asked about his previous work experience and what various jobs had taught him. Positively beaming with pride, Robinson talked about the Greensboro daycare center he and his wife Yolanda Hill operated for years, and what it was like to be 100% responsible for everything that happened in a small business. Hell of a story. Robinson's official lieutenant governor website bio also mentions the daycare center, boasting Robinson was, quote, blessed to start, run, and sell a successful small business with his wife. However, Department of Health and Human Service documents first reported on by the News and Observer's Ned Barnett paint a very different story of Precious Beginnings Daycare Center. Those documents, which I retrieved via public records request and are published here for the first time, chronicle multiple complaints and citations ranging from a lack of supervision to falsifying credentials, including criminal background qualification letters. Oh joy, your little Johnny or Susie could have been watched over by a felon or a sex predator because Robinson didn't care.
Robinson forged documents.
Yeah. Cool. Cool beans.
Yeah.
And the cherry on top, rather than ending by proudly selling, quote, a successful small business, unquote, these records indicate Robinson and Hill closed the daycare center after learning that the DHHS investigation against them would go away only if they never worked in child care in North Carolina again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now you know the rest of the story.
That sounds like how a state agency would handle it. As long as you stop and never do this kind of business again, we won't go after you. But if you're going to persist in this, then we're going to arrest you. Yeah. So from Newshound Ellen at Crooks and Liars, East Palestine mayor busted for lying about Biden and train derailment at the RNC. Mayor Trent Conaway should have talked to the governor of Ohio before whining about not hearing from President Biden.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason we know about this is because Conaway was a featured speaker at last week's Republican Shit Show in Milwaukee. That's where he delivered a long, bitchy keynote about not hearing from President Biden because the governor had already been working with the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
This is from WKBN News. Conaway said Trump's presence was genuine and real. I know a thing or two about train wrecks now, and let me tell you, that's what the Biden administration has been, Conaway said. He said the country needs a leader who loves all Americans and who values small-town communities as much as big cities. Conaway ended his speech with his endorsement of Trump. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the train derailment, Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine told reporters on camera, "Look, the president called me and said anything you need. I have not called him back after that conversation. We will not hesitate to do that if we're seeing a problem or anything, but I'm not seeing it." That's because, the railway safety people and the Department of Transportation and the FBI and we're all there looking into it.
Pete Buttigieg was on the scene.
Yeah, well, he's actually, that's the other thing that happened recently is, these Republican congresspeople who think that the Transportation Safety Board is run by Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
It is independent from any political appointee.
That's the point.
As it should be.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just go thumb through Project 2025 and note all the things that you will lose.
Yeah.
Your rights, your services, your basic freedoms.
Any ability to investigate when something goes wrong. Because it will be a Trump loyalist deciding what gets investigated and what doesn't. Yeah.
Hey, speaking of Trump loyalists, during his 2-hour chat with Jack Posobiec this week, unemployed Fox News loser Tucker Carlson said, quote, "We haven't seen big successes from female leaders," unquote, claimed women politicians are more bloodthirsty and violent than men, blamed the Ukraine war, quote, on a woman, and compared Kamala Harris to Paul Pot.
He is such a loser.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson, in order to have an audience, is going on the Jack Posobiec show.
Please pay attention to me, please.
God.
And he's rich. He's rich as hell.
Yeah.
These people.
But he's like Megyn Kelly. I got to be on or I don't exist.
Yeah, I gotta have influence. I gotta have power. I gotta have clout, and I have to punish people who made fun of me.
I have to see myself on media. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not in the mirror though, because you're a fucking vampire. But,
that's it.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, if somebody gave me $26 million, this podcast would shut down tomorrow. And I'm not doing it for the money, but I don't need to be on the air all the time in order to have my identity.
Well, you know what our plan was or is when we get that big $50 million check from the anonymous George Soros fund.
Yeah.
It's the idea. Well, we kicked this idea around before. I mean, we can't afford it by a long shot, but buy one of those Route 66 hotel motels or a big old rambling house and turn it into a writer's retreat, a liberal writer's retreat.
Or a knitting retreat also.
Or knitting retreat.
We could do, depending on the season.
They're not incompatible, but
they're not.
We sponsor people free of charge, meals and, room and board provided. You come out and we do training sessions and we learn how to write together and we publish things we write. It doesn't have to be all liberal stuff. I write science fiction. I've written essays. It doesn't have to be any of that. But we would remain politically active, but we would turn our talents into something ambitious.
Yeah.
Because we would be able to do that. Right down the street from us in a house that God knows how it got paid for in an expensive part of town, the Illinois Policy Institute is sitting right there because they get a shit ton of money. They got money from the tobacco people. They got money from
U-lines,
U-lines from big oil to crank out shitty white papers on libertarian ideas that would never
releases.
Work and are destructive.
Yeah.
And they can do that because they have an enormous funding base that pays for it all.
Right.
So our fantasy was always, let's do something like that on the side of the Angels.
Oh, I can absolutely see you setting up a workforce development center in downtown Springfield.
Oh, absolutely.
Too.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, this would be, we'd have a ball doing it. This would be able to amplify our energies 1,000 times, hire people that we know who really need to be hired, who really need to make a paycheck every 2 weeks to keep body and soul together and really fund what might turn out to be one of the little acorns that grows into a liberal media. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh, wouldn't that be fun?
But, other people have big lottery dreams. Our dream is to open a writer's retreat that features liberal writers and keeps them housed and fed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And here's a local story that came across our screens this week. A great story from the most unlikely of places, Cook County Jail. This is from Eureka, a newsletter that sparks ideas. Quote, Chicago's Cook County Jail is one of the largest and toughest detention facilities in the United States. In 2012, Dr. Mikhail Korenman initiated a chess program for the inmates, introducing the game as part of a broader educational and rehabilitation strategy. The program started small but soon expanded due to its popularity among the inmates. The results were surprising and dramatic. Not only did participation in chess reduce the behavioral problems, but it also sparked a remarkable change in the atmosphere within the prison. Inmates, many of whom had never played chess before, embraced the game with intense enthusiasm. The data from the program showed significant improvements in the behavior and well-being of the participants. Recidivism rates, a critical measure of rehabilitation success, were notably lower among the inmates who participated in the chess program compared with the general prison population. In 2021, 7 individuals at the Cook County Jail competed in an online international chess tournament and took second place in the world.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's just awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Each week we post to our Facebook page and website an Internet Kitty sent in by you, the listeners. This week's Internet Kitty is Jax. Jax is a cat belonging to our dear friend and my boss, John Amato. And of course, Jax eats freshly poured cat food, our fake sponsor. Whether you serve Pet Store Perfection or Dollar Store Drek, your cat will sit on the nice warm server of your top 10 liberal blog and demand that the food they eat is only freshly poured.
Freshly poured, freshly poured. Oh my Lord, it's freshly poured.
And you can visit Jax at our Facebook page or website, proleftpod.com. And you can send your Internet Kitty, dog, or other pet to us at our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, where you can also write to both of us. Feel free to write to us. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write to us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go Postal Unions! Letter on the air unless you say otherwise.
Do not forget our gourmet coffee guidelines. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage or a Route 66 motel for yourself, buy one for us. This isn't charity. This is our job, and we like it to be a much, much bigger thing than it already is.
Mm-hmm.
If you can spare $5 a month, please spare $5 a month. And thank you so much for doing that. The place to go to put the money in the bank is patreon.com/proleftpod. Also, Please share our show on social media. And if you love this podcast, please get someone else to listen to it. And thanks for doing that too.
We have at least 3 new Patreons this week, which, again, it's climbing. It is climbing, the number of people who are supporting our show, and we really, really appreciate it. Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties think the Presumed Innocent TV series is good, but not great, largely because the part of the cat was underwritten.
Let's think about living. Think about living. Let's think about loving. Think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.